In this How-To-Svelte, we're going to make an accordion. And this is the completed accordion in the Svelte REPL. And within these accordions, we're also going to play around a little bit with Svelte transitions, as well as bringing a modal in. And we'll do that with the map. And then also another button to take you to Wikipedia to find more information. So if we go over to W3 School's How To section, you can find the accordion at the top there. We'll go ahead and just copy all their HTML. Now, one thing that you'll see when you go to W3 Schools is the way they're controlling this accordion is through the display property. And they're adjusting that inside their JavaScript. We're going to do it a little bit differently. And instead of doing the display property, which is not a property we can animate, we're going to do it with the height property instead. So we'll set display to block. And instead we'll add a height property set to 0. And then you can see that the panels hide themselves. And as soon as we put them up to, let's say, 170 pixels, then we can see them. So that's actually what we're going to focus on toggling. Now, if we look at the HTML, we can see that there is a symmetry to this. So what we'll do is we'll take one of these and we'll make it a component. Now, I'm going to base mine off of continents. So whatever you decide to make yours off of, that's what you're going to name your component. But I'm going to base it off of continents. So a single component will be a continent component. And then we'll go ahead and move the CSS over as well. And then we'll remove these from the app component and we'll import continent. And as soon as I do that, it shows up. Now there's no functionality yet, but we'll add that slowly. The next thing you can see is that each of these buttons not only has a label here, but it also has a plus sign that changes to a minus sign. And we'll just start off by adding the plus sign now. Then we'll go ahead and add some CSS for this as well. So if we take a look at the CSS, we can see that they've added a class here called active. And so we want to add that active class to this button when some condition evaluates to true. And what we'll do is we'll create a Boolean up here called isOpen. And so when isOpen is true, let's see what happens. Yeah, so then the CSS class gets added and the background becomes blue and the text is white. Now the other thing that happens when isOpen is true is we should be able to see the content inside. And that's this content right here. And we'll want to show that content by adding a class to this div, and we'll call it OpenPanel. So OpenPanel will get added to this div when some condition evaluates to true, and it's going to be the exact same condition here. So when isOpen is true, let's go ahead and make it true. You can see it opens up and we can see the text in there. And then the next thing we want to set up is how to open this. And you can see that this is a button. So when we click on this button, that's when we want to toggle this isOpen value. So let's set up an onClick event listener. And then the handler will just be to take isOpen and assign it to the opposite of whatever it is. So it's currently false. If I click it, it becomes true, and we can see the div below. If I click it again, it becomes false, and then we can't see the div below. Now let's work on bringing in actual content. So this is just the dummy content we have here. Let's go ahead and set up an object. Like I said, this particular accordion is going to be about continents. So my data is going to be, you can feel free to head over to this REPL and copy the data I'm using, or go ahead and use your own, and you can see the shape of the data here. I've got a heading, content, a learn URL, and a map URL. And so let's go ahead and export this, and we'll import it into the app component. Well, let's go over to continent first and see actually what we're going to do here. So this section 1 will be a dynamic variable, and we'll call that heading. And so let's make a variable up there called heading, and we're going to pipe this up to app. So let's export it. And this part down here, this lorem ipsum paragraph tag, that's going to correspond to the content here. So we'll make another variable, and inside of here, we'll put content. Now coming over to app, let's go ahead and pull this in. We'll use an each loop. And they all show up here. We can't, everything's undefined because we haven't actually reached the data inside the object yet. And instead of saying continent, we're going to actually destructure this. So over in app, we'll take continent and we'll destructure, and we'll do heading, content, learn URL, and map URL. So those are all the properties that we have here in each of these objects. And the fact that we've exported these, we can now pipe heading in as well as content. And so now you can see we've got the continent name showing up, and if I open one of these, we've actually got the content inside as well. Now the other thing we're going to do is deal with this plus sign. When this is open, this needs to change to a minus sign. But we only want to see the minus sign if is open is true. So let's set up an if block. So now if I click this, this changes to a minus sign. I close it, and it comes back to a plus sign. I'm going to go ahead and put this heading also inside of a span tag. And I'm going to add a little bit of CSS that I've generated in the project. I'm going to change this div to a section tag. Good, and that's how you make an accordion using Svelte. This is just the general idea, using a data object, piping it into a component, and then using some classes to control when we actually see the content and when it's hidden. And then we're using an if block here to help us show some elements on the page and then hide some elements on the page. Now everything after this point will be extra. We'll go ahead and take this content area and we'll add a couple buttons down here. One for a map and one for learning more. So let's go ahead and add the map button. Good, so now we have the map button here. Now it doesn't work yet, but the idea is that we will click it and that will open up a modal. So let's go ahead and bring in our modal component, and I'll do that by just going over to W3 Schools. And if you look under modal boxes, we can just use this. And so we're going to want to import map modal into app. And the reason we can't see map modal now is because inside the CSS, it has a display of none. So if we set this to block, you can see that it shows up. Now, none of this works yet, but at least we know that the modal's showing up. And then what we'll do in app is we'll add an if block, and we'll create a Boolean called modal showing. And we'll set that to false. So in the if block, if modal is showing, then it'll show the modal. And because it's set to false, it's not showing. Let's just quickly set it to true to make sure it works. It does. Put it back to false. And what we'll do is when this button is clicked, that's when we want to take modal showing and we'll assign it to true. Good. Now let's go ahead and focus on this closer icon that's inside of map modal. That's this span tag. And again, we'll forward an on-click event up to app. And that's going to be inside map modal this time. And then we're actually going to want to just do this same thing, this same anonymous function, but we'll now set modal showing to false. So let's deal with adding the map image to this modal. And the map image is going to come from our continents data object. You can see we got a map URL. And so inside of map modal, instead of showing this paragraph tag, let's change it to an image tag. So the source attribute, let's go ahead and make a variable for that. We'll call it map URL. Up in the script tag, we'll make that. Then that gets passed up to the parent inside of map modal. Inside here, let's go ahead and make a variable called continent map. Set it to an empty string. And what we're going to need to do is, when this button is clicked, we're going to need to change modal showing to true, but we're also going to need to set continent map to be this map URL on the side of our data object. So let's rework this event handler. We'll call an event handler that we'll make in a few seconds, and we'll call it show map. And we need to pass it a value. In fact, we need to pass it this map URL value that's coming in. This is the only place it's going to be able to get it. This data is being passed through. So let's come up here and we'll make show map. And it's going to take a parameter. We'll call it just map URL. We'll set continent map, this variable here, to be map URL. So whatever value gets passed in here, continent map will be set to that. And then we need to handle the Boolean. So I think that'll do it. Let's try that. Okay, yeah, so we're not seeing it because we haven't actually passed the value over here. We haven't connected the continent map value to the map URL value. So let's do that and let's try it now. Okay, good. Now we just have to add some CSS to this to tame it a little bit. Okay, so now if we try it, good, it comes in and it's centered. Now let's go ahead and just add a Svelte transition so that it looks a little nicer when it comes in. So let's come over here to map modal and we'll import fade and fly from Svelte transition. And what we want to animate is the div here when it comes in. And what we'll do is we'll take transition and we'll have it fly in, but on the out, we'll just have it fade. Flies in from the top and then should just fade. Now, this tinted background is also coming in a little abruptly, so let's also put a transition on that. And we'll just do a simple fade. Good, so now the background fades in, this flies in. If I close this, both the background and the map itself fade out. Last thing we want to do is let's add another button here called Learn More. And the href will create a variable called Learn More. And Learn More will be the learn URL value, and that comes from our continents data here. You can see the learn URL here. So now when somebody comes in here and clicks to learn more, it should open up a new tab and take them to Wikipedia to learn more. And this is how we've made our accordion using Svelte.